Well, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Just a few days ago, the preliminary report was released for the terrible University of Mississippi Air Care helicopter crash that took place back on March 10th of this year. Now, this preliminary report does shed some light, but it's also possible that it raises more questions than it answers. But let's see what it says, so stick around and I'll be right back. So here's what we know, and some of this is going to be a recap from the initial report, but the operator here is MedTrans, which you guys probably know is a part of the Global Medical Response, or GMR, family. Now, the pilot was an employee of MedTrans, while the flight paramedic and the flight nurse were both employees of the University of Mississippi Hospital System, which is a very large teaching hospital and trauma system headquartered in Jackson, Mississippi in the United States. Now, the aircraft in this accident is this 2012 Airbus EC-135 with tail number November 835 Charlie Sierra. Now, this EC-135 was a P2 Plus variant with the PW206B2 Pratt & Whitney turboshaft engines, each making about 650 to 700 horsepower for a total of somewhere between 1,300 and 1,400 horsepower. Now, this helicopter did have an autopilot system and an integrated crash-resistant fuel system. Now, the pilot, again employed by MedTrans, was more than qualified with over 10,000 hours of helicopter time, with just about every rating that you could possibly ask for in a commercial helicopter pilot. So this aircraft, call sign Air Care 3, had just finished taking a patient to St. Dominic Jackson Memorial Hospital. Now, they're about to head home, but first they have to make this little hop over to what they call their MedComm, which is basically a big state-of-the-art dispatch and training center for air care, but it is also a centrally located place for all their aircraft to refuel. So they jump over to their MedComm, they top off their fuel, and then head northeast towards their home base, which is in Golden Triangle Regional Airport, which is up in Columbus, Mississippi. Now, they reach a cruise altitude of about 2,200 feet above the ground, and they're traveling about 120, 125 knots when MedComm hears the flight nurse jump on the radio and state, "Hey, we've got a major problem. We are having an emergency landing in a field right now. Ops are not good. Controls are giving us a lot of trouble. Coming in fast." Well, the helicopter does eventually crash right here in this little clearing that you see and right up against this tree line. And all occupants were killed, and a post-impact fire did ensue that lasted for nearly 3 hours. Now, even though this was pretty remote, there was a witness to pretty much this entire crash, and he was an employee of this fish hatchery that you see here, which was what all these rectangular ponds are on the screen. Now, this guy was actually inside of his truck at the time with the windows rolled up when he heard a loud boom and then turned to look at the helicopter and noted that he could not hear any engine noise at this point, nor did he see any fire or smoke coming out of the back of the helicopter. He said it looked like the helicopter was kind of coasting and descending at about a 45-degree angle, and that the helicopter was kind of wobbling a little bit. He ended all this by stating that from the time he heard that boom until the time the helicopter actually impacted the ground was no more than 15 seconds. So what in the world happened here? Well, there's not a whole lot that we can rule out, but we can probably at least rule out that the pilot was incapacitated somehow, because the nurse probably would have said that when they called on the radio. Now, the fact that the nurse said anything at all tells me that the pilot was doing exactly what he probably should have been doing, which is trying to fly the aircraft. Likewise, there is pretty much no safe place out here to land this aircraft, and the pilot still somehow was able to control the helicopter, at least to the point of being able to point it towards this tiny little field to avoid hitting the trees. And so the big focus is going to be on the loud bang that witness heard. Now, regardless of what the cause is, it does seem likely that the helicopter had little to no power after the boom occurred, and that this pilot was essentially trying to land this EC-135 under a full auto rotation with no power at all. But what could have caused that loud boom in the first place? Well, Unfortunately, there are many things that could cause that boom. Now, we need to remember that this is a turboshaft engine on this aircraft, which means they are gas turbine engines where the combustion process is a continuous process as opposed to like a piston engine that has intermittent combustion on every 2 or 4 strokes. With a turbine power plant like this, the combustion process is continuous, and any interruption in that combustion process can cause unburnt jet fuel to ignite and cause a loud boom as the engine is shutting down or braking or suffering some form of catastrophic damage. In other words, anything that could cause these engines to shut down abruptly could also cause that loud boom to occur. This could be anything from a catastrophic failure inside the turbine itself to foreign debris or a direct intake from a bird strike. I mean, they were directly over a wildlife preserve, so we can't rule that out. Or maybe even bad fuel that caused one or both engines to flame out. Or while not very common, but certainly is always a possibility in all of these aircraft, is the consideration that the liquid oxygen system, which is used to provide medical grade oxygen to the patient while in flight, could have certainly exploded somehow and sending all kinds of shrapnel into the engines and shutting them down. But I think the nurse who was sitting in the back of this aircraft and facing rearward probably would have said something about that during his radio communication. And also, it's kind of hard to tell if the things the nurse said on the radio, like the controls are giving us trouble, whether that came from the pilot telling him that, or if the nurse just interpreted that on his own. I don't really know. But either way, this investigation is going to focus heavily on why this helicopter lost engine power in the first place, which may prove extremely difficult due to the fact that the helicopter burned for a whopping 3 hours. This was an extremely remote place to crash this aircraft, and any fire department who responded to this accident would have run out of water on their engine within just, a few minutes, and then would have had to begin shuttling water from off-site, which is very time-consuming and simply not very efficient. This is all to say that the post-impact fire most likely destroyed anything related to saved electronic data and may have even destroyed some mechanical parts, which means continuity and function tests of all these controls, it may be greatly inhibited or impossible altogether. But this sounds like a terrifying final 15 seconds for this crew, and I feel for all of their families and colleagues. This will most likely be a very in-depth investigation by the NTSB, but it will probably also include MedTrans, Airbus, and especially Pratt & Whitney, with lots of focus being on the engines themselves and any evidence that may point to why they may have stopped providing power in the first place. Now, this investigation will take some time, and we should probably expect a final report from the NTSB sometime in 2026, or sometimes they even might go till 2027. But until then, stay tuned for any more updates on this, and everybody fly safe.